right. Hello and welcome. I'm adding the spotlight feature for myself and Matthew Zylstra as your hosts of the speaker session today, so that everybody can see us on the video and we'll be on the recording. When we record these, they go to our YouTube channel for the Coincidence Project, and you can keep your video off and you won't appear on the recording. So in that way, it can remain private for you as someone joining us today. So let's see, I'll try to have those of you who are here with us on mute, and we will have plenty of time at the end for conversation and questions and answers. So you can come off mute at that time, but we'll kind of open with some remarks today, and then we'll do more of a conversation later. I'd love to know where everybody is joining us from today. Sue has already, head of the class, she's posted it, calling in from Pasadena, California today. And please post where you are in the world. I am calling in from India today. Matthew's in South Africa, which is his norm. We've got Switzerland. Welcome from Switzerland. And California and Michigan and Belgium. Greetings. Israel, that's wonderful. Welcome. New York. Holland, Michigan. Sounds exotic. Holland, Michigan. The Western Cape of South Africa. Okay. And another set of guests calling in from Wild Spirit, South Africa. That sounds beautiful. Australia, welcome. Yeah, we're trying to offer these at different times of the day so that our different friends around the world can join us as they're able. We'll keep trying to offer some that those in Asia and Australia can more easily join us. Some of the regular times for people in the US are middle of the night, the wee hours of the morning for our colleagues in Australia and in Asia. So welcome. This is a speaker series, a monthly session hosted by the Coincidence Project. And we launched our website at the beginning of the year and have been doing a monthly Coincidence Cafe and the speaker series. So we have 2 events per month right now. We'll start posting other courses and workshops and things like that with offerings with different people's expertise, exploring how to illuminate the invisible currents that connect and unify us. And meaningful coincidences, synchronicity and serendipity really allow us to do that. So just going to, so I'm going to open with a story and then turn it over to my friend Matthew here to talk with us a bit more. The area that we're exploring today is nature connection and meaningful coincidences, and also the connection to compassion and living in a more connected, sustainable, compassionate way with the earth and with all living beings. And just at the end of college, I was very fortunate to go on a vision quest that was conducted in tradition honoring Native American Indians, handed down from Lakota Sioux elders, and shared with other people that wanted to continue that tradition, not only from Native American tribes, but from all backgrounds. And in preparing to go on the vision quest, we did a full day's walk and fast, being out on the land, not interacting with other humans, just being with nature and the natural world. And on the quest, you're invited to carry with you one particular topic or question that's really the focus of the quest. And many other things might be attached to it. It's kind of like a spider's web, and you pick one strand that you follow in, but the whole web of our lives is available really to be doing deeper work, trying to figure out our place in the world and how to release things from the past that have bound us and keep us from moving more freely into the future, into inhabiting ourselves more fully and deciding on how to give our gifts to the world. The Vision Quest was very much a community enterprise, although the individual does the quest. The entire context of the quest is so that each individual understood the gifts they're meant to give back to community. So I was at the end of college and getting ready to enter my adult professional life working in the world and trying to figure out how I might offer my gifts to the community of other beings, human and non-human. And I felt very locked and sort of inhibited or bound in some way. There was something that was very tight in me that I couldn't get to and I couldn't release on this medicine walk, which was preparation about a month before the quest would happen. And I was walking through the forest and I felt it like almost like cramping in my guts or something, that there was something blocked and I couldn't get at it. And I really wanted to understand what was really holding me. It was something about the past that was really keeping me locked up. And as I was walking, out of nowhere, there was this enormous crack in the forest. And the top of one of the trees broke off, and very tall trees in the forest around me. And I was sort of clenched and wanting to release energy. And the tree did it for me, it felt like. And as the tree cracked and made this enormous sound and big branch fell, my body kind of experienced the same thing. And it felt like there was this opening and this shattering, but it was a shattering that needed to happen. And I just started sobbing. It became this huge cathartic kind of release of what had been holding me that I couldn't really get access to. So it felt like the work that needed to be done. The forest around me actually helped to do the work that was needed for my ongoing progression, my own benefit of who I want to be for the world. So yeah, I've always felt so deeply connected to nature, and it's not just the animals and birds and insects and the plants and the trees, the forest itself, to me, seem sentient, conscious, aware, and interacting with us. They are friends we haven't met yet, just as other humans might be. And, in that moment in the forest, I felt that the tree created this immense, almost ecstatic, very, very dramatic opportunity for healing, for release that I desperately needed. And it was like the tree gave me that. It was very much a gift. So with that story, I'll now hand it over to Matthew to tell us a little more about his background and this field. Matthew.
Thanks, Juliet. That's a really cool story. And we don't get an awful, at least my experience in researching this, we don't get an awful lot with plants. So it's really nice to have the plants and trees one, especially when it's quite striking like that. Yeah, well, I'm also going to start with a story before going into a bit of detail as to some of my past research on this topic. I'm in South Africa. I've been here for 15 years. My accent is Australian. That's where I was born, but my roots are quite varied, New Zealand, Dutch, and so forth. So I see myself more these days as just a citizen of this beautiful earth. I will take you back to a story. So I've just got to get this story, which goes back to about 2005. In August 2005, actually. And I've chosen this story just because not only was it particularly profound and really broke my excessive rationality at the time that I was getting into, but also the timing in my life was really important. And it involves a death and a tragedy, as these experiences often do. And a good friend of mine was hiking in Iceland and had an accident there, and it was fatal. And in my grief at the news, I was in the Netherlands at the time, and I just took my bike into the woods, and I sat there and I had my listening to music to sort of try to calm me, and I guess I said a bit of a prayer, hey, mate, I hope you're, doing okay. I didn't really know what I was trying to do with that, but just, I guess just wishing for wherever his spirit was to move on. And moments after that little utterance, I had 3 dragonflies land on me, one on my forehead, as you can see, my shoulder, and then my forearm on the other side, which is out of picture here. And it was certainly a moment of catharsis. I didn't really know what to make of it. It almost felt a natural extension of what I was, but of what I was feeling, but I'd never had something like that in my life up until that point. And they stayed there for the longest time. And this was in the era before selfies were a thing, but I did actually happen to have my camera in my backpack unintentionally, and was able to snap a picture just to remind myself that it wasn't fantasy. And I was studying environmental science, so I was obviously looking for ways to dismiss it, and I ran it by friends and what have you. And I wasn't near a water body, and obviously dragonflies are fairly flighty, and these stayed for, it felt like the longest time. I know it's a bit of a saying, but at least for 30 seconds, a minute or more, and then one by one they all took off again. And that really got me thinking about where I was in my scientific career, what I was about to head down to, and just made me have a huge sense of another part of my life that I probably had denied a bit until that point in time. Now, there is an interesting addendum to this experience. I did have this one other time coming out of my sort of little self-vision quest, Juliet. I'd spent 3 days fasting myself, just as a little self thing in 2012, thinking about this encounter back in 2005. And sure as anything, one landed on the brim of my hat. Didn't have a camera that time, but in 2018, I was in New Zealand and going into a walk that I was doing as a 3 days fasting thing. And I saw this delightfully big dragonfly, and I almost coaxed it, like thinking, no, thinking back to this experience, it has never happened again, thinking, I dare you, and it just pivoted and came straight for my hat and landed on my hat there on the right and didn't move. Even when I got too close with my camera, it did move, and then it came back, and I actually kept walking, and it was on my hat for about 5 to 10 minutes. So, I think, the alignment of those sort of 3 sequence of events around that particular thought or initial event really was has left a huge impression on me and my understandings and interactions of with the natural world. So I will go on here with a few more slides, just looking at research that I did as part of my PhD back between 2009 and 2014. So that was done through Stellenbosch University in South Africa. I am now the program manager at the Quindalo Institute, but the research was through Stellenbosch University. So I'll just look at some of the key elements that came out of that research. I think during the course of that research, I found this lovely quote from Barry Lopez, who's a North American nature writer. And he writes, learning one's place through attention to animals is not solely a matter of being open to statements that they might make about the physical, chemical, and biological realms we share, but a more profound communication can take place. And in the second sphere, animals have volition, they have intention, and the power of influence and the capacity to intervene in our lives. I've never known people who are entirely comfortable addressing such things. Fortunately, since that time, there are people more comfortable to address such things. And hopefully on this webinar, we have some of those people. And actually at the Coincidence Project, of course, many more. But that was a bit of backdrop for this research. And I'm just to quickly define what I would call synchronicity within nature, or a nature coincidence, is a notable experience of 2 or more physical or psychological events of comparable content coinciding in an unlikely and meaningful way, where at least one of those events prominently involves non-human natural phenomena. And I don't want to perpetuate the separation between people and nature. It's a long philosophical topic, but I am including humans here as nature, but as a different kind of nature. To just put a bit of a theoretical context here, I think it's important that we understand which perspective we're looking at. And I'm quite a fan of Ken Wilber's 4 quadrants. And without going into too much detail here, it's just to acknowledge that there are multiple perspectives on the natural world happening in every moment. Now, I've put here in the middle nature coincidences. You could put any issue you wanted in there, any particular place, any particular topic. But it's to understand that there's an interior perspective going on in the world, there's an exterior, and that can happen at the individual and the collective level. And each of those realities are valid in their own right, but they may be conflicting. And we need to just be transparent about what we're including and what we're excluding in any form of research, or even in any form of dialogue or conversation. And equally, you could also look at it, turn it, flip it around and look from the subject, the tree, the animal, in this case, I spoke about the dragonfly, and looking out and saying, well, what's their individual experience within, as an entity in their own right, as part of a culture. We know cetaceans, whales and dolphins have distinct cultures. So there are all these things that we can look at. So I just wanted to emphasize that and say that with my research, I was very much looking at people's experiences, from the self and consciousness. So I was looking at phenomenology and sort of psychology as a way of unpacking that. There is, however, something to be said when you have enough subjective experiences, they can become intersubjective. And also we're looking at social cultural aspects as well. So cultures and worldviews. And on that note, it's important to acknowledge that nature coincidences and other worldviews could be very much matter of fact. You know, for over 90% of human history, our core belief as humans was animism. And that really only started to die away at the advent of civilization and the early parts of religion. And I mean, there's even in European folklore, it was quite commonplace, probably until about the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. So totemic beliefs are prevalent in many cultures around the world. Here in Southern Africa, for example, we have the understanding that animals can be linked to the embodiment of deceased ancestors within our families. And one of the well-known Zulu shamans, if you will, I mean, here we call him a Sanusi or a Sangoma, was Credo Mutwa, who is much celebrated, but also was very controversial. But he, in his book, Isilwani, the Animal, he speaks of Nomkhubulwani, which is the great Earth Mother, she who chooses the state of an animal. And Nomkhubulwani could actually manifest at will as a springbok, an eland, a python, an elephant, a rhino, giraffe, lion, and so forth. So there's very much this animist belief, and that certain animals could appear after loved ones had died. And this is similar to the Yolngu people in Northeast Arnhem Land of Australia, where I spent some time. They've got a number of totems, one of them here being Garkman, the green tree frog. But a belief there, which is commonly shared by Aboriginal people, was when people pass away, the spirit will travel to sort of the nearest loved one, and that could be in the form of a bird in particular. But I'm not just talking here about deceased people. Of course, there are many other forms of nature coincidences. Briefly, what I did was I looked at people's lived experiences in the form of interviews and surveys. I listened to them as they were retold. I listened to them again and again and again. I started to code those interviews. I grouped it into thematic families. Other people looked at those codes to make sure that I was coding correctly. I looked at relationships and I started to reassemble that. And part of phenomenology is writing, and you write and you rewrite and you write to create these rich descriptions to sort of distill the essence of what does it feel like to have a nature coincidence. And if you want to read that, you can go to this website, which is a bit of a portal for my research, eyesforearth.org. And on the homepage there at the moment, I've got a link that you can go to read one of those rich descriptions that I wrote about nature coincidences. Some of the themes that came out of this research that I looked at is there's two types of themes. There was the what, the textual themes, the how, the structural themes, and there's a series of commonalities that came out of all the stories. Some of those commonalities in the what are quite, I mean, you see them in in other forms of synchronicities with people. But this aspect of communication was one in particular that I think is quite unique to animals, a sense of a communication happening. Often it presents a certain kind of insight or profound knowing of feeling in flow and having trust in the universe. And it really deepens a sense of connectedness, as well as the emotions of awe, joy, gratitude, and humility. And then in terms of how these coincidences happen, the temporal setting often tended to be a transition. Now, I've spoken about the transition of life and death, but there could be a transition between day and night, dusk and dawn. That was often quite a common theme. A transition between being very active and then sort of stilling, a transition between careers. And I know that Bernie, who coordinates the Coincidence Project, has spoken about that many times as well. The spatial setting was much more variable in synchronicity experiences as compared to, I also studied meaningful nature experiences that were not considered to be synchronicity. And there, the spatial setting, there were certain elements, but synchronicity sort of could happen anytime, anywhere. And it seemed to be much more related to the perceptual focus of the individual, the intention, attention they were carrying. Sometimes that could be a very much an intentional activity like a ceremony or a ritual. If it was more passive, there was a sort of openness and receptivity, kind of expectancy, often linked to emotional intensity, sort of rumination, being maybe in a bad headspace or being very worked up. People's emotional states seem very much correlated with that. And interestingly, the animals that I most encountered in these stories were winged animals. So generally that would be birds and insects, but I'll get to more of that in a second. And if there was a social setting, if it wasn't solo experience, a social setting often was bonded. The bonding was a real thing. So it could be between family or close friends. There were some curious findings, and this was sort of more retrospectively. As I was completing my research, a former student at the time handed me this tome by this guy called Manly Hall. It was called The Secret Teachings of All Ages. I was quite curious, and I flicked through this book, and there was actually a section on animals. And he was saying that in these secret teachings that winged creatures were in fact more likely to be prevalent in such encounters. And he actually goes on to say that animals capable of functioning in two or more elements. So that means, does it live in water? Can it live on land? Like, for example, a seal or an otter. They would consider messages interfacing between the spirits of those planes. And also lower kingdoms of nature, which you might say would be insects, for example. The idea being that they could respond most readily to the impulses of the gods. What might have been called gods back then could be called psyche now. We're not going to look at causations here right away, but it was an interesting idea. And even Jung and Freud were interested in insect synchronicities because they thought about this possibility of direct psychical transference. So I was asked to maybe speak about types of nature coincidences, and I haven't fully developed this thinking yet. Because one thing is, like, which perspective are we looking at? Are we looking at the types from the experiencer? Are we looking at the types from a cultural tradition? In which case you might say, oh, that's the ancestors. But the experiencer who may not be of that cultural tradition might see it differently. Or are we trying to look more objectively at people experiencing and then sort of give it a tag? So this is just more of a collection of moving bubbles, and I think many overlap. But I was going back to my research and thinking about what I've also experienced. There does seem to be this moving, this ground of themes around intention, attention, and the way that can bring connection, but also our sensory connection in that moment. And there's the ones that are more active, where, as I said, ceremony or ritual, but there's also the passive ones that can appear. And when I say passive, we're not really looking for them. We could be in a bit of a funk. We're in a bad space, and something happens, or, as Juliet said, I think Juliet is a classic example. There was an activeness in that she was on a vision quest, but there's a passiveness in that she wasn't necessarily expecting a tree or looking for some sort of sign in that moment. Although there's this non-expected expectancy. It seems to be also part of synchronicity, that we're not expecting it, but there's a part of it that's receptive and kind of expecting. And then these other sorts of things. I think one part of this active passive thing is that this is a patterning of perception where, when we are thinking about something, we can pick something out. The old adage, oh, you buy a red car, you see red cars everywhere. Well, that's one thing, and that can explain some of the way that our psyche and subconscious might pick these things out. But there's another element, which I think is central here, is sort of the visitation. And the visitation is a word that's more synonymous with animals, but that can appear in other forms as well, plants and celestial phenomena. And that visitation can come out of what we could call like a divination, where a sign appears, but it can also be, as I said, this result of sort of ruminating, and something else comes out. And there's a distinction there between sign and omen, which I won't go into now. And there's this sense of communication somehow. And, was it sort of more active that we called up that particular animal? Is it some sort of mirroring, sort of reflection between what we're thinking and out there? There's a sense of, and I mean, it isn't a great word, but this idea that our psyche sort of somehow penetrates the rest of the field, if you will. I mean, I'm talking about here what it feels like, not necessarily about what is going on, but what it feels like. And this idea of an apparition, and I'm not speaking here of a ghost or anything, but this apparition of just as things appear, and that could be the appearance of a rainbow, of lightning, or a shooting star or something at a particular moment. So yeah, I mean, these are sort of circulating for me, and I want to sort of think about this in a bit more detail as I go forward with this work. Some examples here. This is just from a couple of weeks ago, and this is quite an interesting one. I was with a group of youth at facilitating a day down here locally, and we had just been playing a game called Otter and Gull. So someone was the otter, everyone else was the gull, and they had to steal a fish between the otter's legs. That was the game. Now, moments after I took this photograph, we stopped and had a breather, and there out the back there where I just circled, an otter came along, slinked into the water, and we didn't see it again. And it was witnessed by a bunch of us, and we're all quite curious by that. I mean, the paralleling between what we were doing in terms of embodying otter and an otter appearing. And I mean, otters are on this coastline for sure, but for many of us, it's a rare sighting indeed. They're quite shy. You don't often encounter them. So that was quite funny. Speaking of sort of, so there was this joke that it was that we had somehow called it up. Calling up as another example here, some years ago, a former colleague of mine, I asked her if she had a totem. She's from the Closter tradition here, and she said she did, and it's a lekovan, which is the local name for the Nile monitor. And I was actually working on my synchronicity research that day, and I came up, and sure as anything, around our house there was a Nile monitor. It was only the second time I ever saw one while living there. I called her out, and her face was quite shocked. She didn't quite appreciate seeing that. And there was a sense in her own mind that she had spoken the totem she shouldn't have, and therefore it had appeared. I want to keep these stories brief, but there's other ones that just sort of almost come out as kind of a lesson being taught. I was swimming in our local estuary, getting very cold at the time. I knew this was an octopus's den. I wanted to go down and take a peek, and I try to usually do that with some respect. And that time, in that moment, I had this sort of voice in my head, like, "Oh, bugger it, I'm cold. I'm just going to swim down." And I felt cheeky and disrespectful. And as I was going down, my weight belt fell off. And I have not worked out how that happened. And I've shown it to two friends who are freediving instructors, and they're also a bit flummoxed as to how those weights fell off. Now, I mean, for me, there was a lesson learned. We might find, I'm still seeking for the rational explanation. There's one idea I have as to how that might have fallen off rationally. But the meaning for me anyway was there, that, that I had approached that octopus disrespectfully. And then, as I said, there are these other ones where just rainbows appear at times that are poignant. And I think a lot of people experience this across many traditions. And there's the examples which I haven't gone into here with plants and trees, the idea that we've picked up a communication from plants, or somehow they respond to our whims and emotions and thoughts at that point in time. One particular story which I would really encourage you to listen to is this one, and you can put that, you can grab the QR code, or it's at that URL below. This was from one of my interviewees, and it was quite an impressive story because it contains so many of the themes that I have plucked out there, but within one series of stories that involved an otter again. But you can really see the different components of how it sort of contributed to this quite profound nature synchronicity. So yeah, I would, and so that's actually recorded by the person who spoke it, and then my brother actually mixed it with music. to make it quite a pleasant listening experience. So I just wanted to come back to here again. So what I think those experiences show is that I mean, they are all these interior experiences, but so I was starting in that top left quadrant. The more of those experiences we have, which are clearly subjective, they start to become intersubjective. And in the absence of objectivity, intersubjective, that we all share experiences like this, starts to create some kind of a truth with limitations, but a truth nonetheless. And yet when some of those experiences, when they're actually witnessed by others, and I would say that that game I just spoke about when we were imitating the otter on the beach, that actually starts to enter the realm of some sort of objectivity. Any person could have come and seen what we were doing and seen the otter and gone, that's a bit odd. So they don't always lie in the interior. I think one of the things about nature coincidences is that they can, if there are a couple of exterior events happening, become somewhat objective. But does it really matter? When I started my research, I was getting a bit, how might I say, I was getting a lot of these stories come in and I didn't know what to do with them because I kept judging them. Are they real? Can I really analyze these? Are they real? And I got some wonderful advice from a colleague in the Netherlands who said to me, Matt, look, whether or not this phenomenon actually exists is irrelevant. What's important to acknowledge is that these encounters are being perceived, the interpretation exists, and therefore it can have a causal power on attitudes and behaviors towards the environment and oneself and others. And that really was a release for me, realizing, okay, it's the experience itself that we really need to focus on here, not about, trying to find causal explanations or judge them. And, I think the yin yang motive has been very powerful for me in these experiences, because I like to see, as an environmental scientist and an ecologist, I do like to ask, well, is there an ecological explanation here? And there often can be, and there is, but it's like, if I'm totally convinced of the ecological explanation, say the one half of the yin yang, there's always this little seed of doubt that there's something else going on in that dot. And on the other side, even if I'm like, well, that's a proper nature coincidence, I don't know, that's super uncanny, I don't know how to explain that ecologically, there is always a little seed of doubt saying, well, actually there could be a little, there could be something going on here. But that for me defines this sort of indivisible whole. I mean, that's the nature of these dualities together. And I think that's, for me, that's been a wonderful way to approach this. In that's part of it. There's never going to be this pure certainty or surety about any of these. Just to finish up, what's the relevant importance? I know that Juliet's going to go on to some of this, so I'm not going to spend too long here, but it does form this intersubjective truth, as I spoke about. There's this meaning between subjects, and that's the meaning, between humans who experience the same thing, or even a sense of with the animal or something that's experiencing it. There's an empathetic window into other worldviews. And, there's even an element of social justice here and sort of validation. I think a lot of what we see is that, one worldview being superior over the other, often sort of science is being superior over other worldviews. But when you have these experiences, you actually can step into that worldview far more and say, well, actually, perhaps these other worldviews had something going on here that, that needs serious consideration. With animals in particular, this takes us beyond anthropocentrism, this sort of human narcissism, the human adoration and superiority. We actually realize that animals, there's two-way agency here. Animals have intention, they have volition, and they can engage. And maybe they're having a meaningful experience. It isn't always just about us. What's it like for that animal who decides? Listening to a podcast with Bernie on the Coincidence Project, he was interviewing a guy called Yannick Silva recently, and he happened to have this deer encounter where I believe that he actually came up and stroked the deer. Now, I mean, for an animal, a wild animal, to submit, if I will, to being touched and stroked in that way is profound. An animal has to choose that. Now, what's going on in that animal's mind, in that animal's body, to be drawn in? And does it also just want a sense of attention and knowing that it can alleviate a human in some way, particularly if there's an emotional capacity there? So it's an emotionally bonded experience and effective power. And I think it helps us to get out of isolation and loneliness, particularly when we experience this collapsing of boundaries or defenses. So it brings us into this relational worldview where it's a felt sense of interconnectedness. And this importance connectedness I cannot stress enough. Most of my work these days is around nature connection, the importance of nature connection for human health, mental health, planetary health and well-being. And, nature connection is shown to be a very powerful predictor for pro-environmental behavior. It's a powerful predictor for mental health and well-being. And in my research, synchronicity, the more connected people were with nature, the more likely they were to experience synchronicity. The people who experience synchronicity or these nature coincidences were more tended to have higher nature connection. It was very much an interweaving, and one sort of was in hand with the other. And higher levels of nature connection really inspire meaning, beauty, happiness, gratitude and appreciation, awe, humility, and pro-environmental behavior. And it's not just utilitarian pro-environmental behavior here, like, turning off the lights, recycling, gardening, farming, but there's a reverence, I think, that comes with it far more when these encounters are experienced a few times. That, hang on, what I'm dealing with here has sentience, has volition, has consciousness in ways that we might not yet understand. So, as one of my interviewees said, I think that meaningful experiences have shaped me as they're a constant reminder that's not all about me or mankind. So moving from egocentrism to ecocentrism. Thank you for that. I will now hand over to Juliet. There's a nice little quote here to finish from Joseph Cornell, which you can read, and I'm happy to be contacted with any stories, what have you. And I realize that one thing I did want to ask, and you can put it into the chat now as I stop sharing here, is just I'd love to hear what you any particular animals or trees or nature that you've had experience with. I know you can't necessarily type your whole story, but I'd be curious to know what sort of animals or nature you have had any encounters with that you'd like to share. And I guess while we're waiting for that to come in, Juliet, feel free to take over, and then I can, if anyone does want to share any animals or plants or trees or celestial phenomena, clouds or rainbows, we can call it out.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so someone has dropped more details on from a website that others can visit. And Annie, I don't know if maybe you can drop in the chat the animals or plants that you might have had some connection with. We'll just speak for a couple minutes more, and then we'll go to conversation. So we'll go to raised hands in just a couple minutes.
Okay, as a young kid, I had a garter snake, and I kept her in an aquarium with a cover with mesh. And it turned out she was a female, and she had babies, and they ended up getting out and all drying up. And I felt so bad. Well, years later, I was by a tree that was my favorite, and I saw a garter snake across the creek. And I've been very sad about what I did a long time ago. So I said to the garter snake, "I'll never hurt your kind ever again." And the garter snake got in the water and came right over to me. And I was so flabbergasted, I fell up the creek. I was just flabbergasted. So I now make them out of clay.
Oh.
So nice to share with you.
Thank you, Annie. It's wonderful. Yeah, I'm going to see if I can, I had a couple of stories that occurred to me to share as Matthew was speaking and sharing. So I want to share one photo from this week with all of you. All right. Are you able to see that? So I'm traveling in India right now for the first time and having wonderful encounters with the natural world as a result. It's really nice to be in a new place. Sometimes it helps us to become more receptive. I think when we get out of our habitual pattern behaviors, we are more aware, can go into a more expansive state of mind that kind of welcomes amazing connections with nature and other beings. and including celestial phenomenon, as Matthew had included in his remarks. And so that's what made me want to share this photo with all of you. We were going to see some private land of the gentleman in the orange t-shirt there. His name is Horst, a German who has settled in India, in the area near Hampi, which has beautiful boulders all around it, like the ones just behind me in that photo. And we were getting ready to embark upon his land, and he uses it as a hermitage. So he has had people there come for very long stays and just living in caves made by the boulders. So there's simple places people can go just to be solitary in nature, kind of the path of the seekers and the wanderers, the monks living on the land, often caves, to get away from human society and to connect to things beyond that. Part of that, tradition of millennia actually happens on this land. So it's very sacred land. And as we were getting ready to start our day, the first place we hiked to, I looked up and there was a 360-degree rainbow around the sun. And it was just very profound because it was this daytime rainbow. There was no precipitation. I couldn't see any mist or rain or anything that might be causing it. I'm not really familiar with the celestial phenomenon, and I plan to look it up and learn more about it. But it felt very auspicious as this blessing of a full rainbow directly overhead. And my colleague Eon Karas, who's part of Coincidence Project, I'm traveling with her here in India for about a month, and her camera was able to capture this image. So it was just quite beautiful. Felt like a blessing on the land and a blessing on our connection to it. And another story that I'll share is recently I was conducting a 3-day retreat in Connecticut in the northeast of the US with a colleague on mindfulness in nature. And I loved from Matthew's remarks that he saw intention and attention and leading to connection in nature. And those are some of the fundamental principles for mindfulness as well, that we have an intention to be present, to just notice what's really happening. Often without that intention, we're distracted and we're kind of lost in our wandering mind. And the wandering mind often ruminates about the past or worries and frets about the future, neither of which are actually happening. The past is something that's done. It's no longer actually literally physically present with us, but we can be caught up in it. And the future is whatever is to come is unpredicted. We don't know quite what it is, but we spend a lot of mental energy and emotional energy trying to guess what it is and preparing ourselves for it. So mindfulness is a contrast to that in asking us to just be present and open to what's actually unfolding around us. So an intention to be present and to bring our attention, our focus, our awareness to the forefront rather than our kind of mental distraction that can often be the kind of programmed or habitual behavior. And often in mindfulness, then the third thing that people will say with intention and attention is attitude, and that you bring a certain curiosity. And there's some, principles of openness, kind of having a beginner's mind, not thinking you already know everything about what's going to happen. Can be the kind of attitude that allows us to unfold even more easily. So I think there's a deep connection between mindful awareness and synchronicity, meaningful coincidence, in nature and in the human world. Across the board, I think a mindful awareness really gives us a good foundation for noticing when meaningful coincidences occur. And when I was at this retreat for mindfulness in nature, leading it, the first full day we were on the land, we had just led a meditation in a circle. We were by the ocean, so we were meditating with the trees and the plants, the animals, the sea beside us, and we had given people time to go and do a mindful walk, just to take their engaged awareness with them to walk on the land. And I was walking with my co-facilitator, Regan. And as we were walking, a red hawk flew lower, 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 and it passed directly over our heads. If I'd raised my hand I could have pet her belly. I literally could have easily stroked this red hawk. She flew so close to us. And again, it felt like being seen, being witnessed and recognized by that place. We were new to that place, and the place, you know, she was sort of this red hawk seemed like a guardian or a knowledgeable member of the community who was saying, I see you, and you know, you're welcome here. I don't mind being close with you. I don't have to keep my distance. I sense that you can be trusted, that there's, you know, a calmness, a peace, a respect that you're bringing, that I'll acknowledge in coming so close that you could easily touch me if you'd like. And just after that, the hawk flew over us. We walked into a field, and my colleague wandered off. We were still kind of doing our mindful walking, so we weren't really speaking or interacting aloud. We're just maybe looking at each other with meaningful gazes like, wow, did you see that hawk? But we weren't actually talking and processing it at the time. And we separated, and I walked one side of a grassy meadow and she walked to another. And this little groundhog came out and walked along with her and crossed nearly over the tops of her feet, and then went on to go munch on some greenery nearby. And later we asked the people at this retreat center, it used to be a nunnery where the nuns lived. So it was a very sacred place, but now it's for interfaith retreats and practice. And we asked the people that work there, hey, so we had a really neat encounters today with a red hawk and with a groundhog. And they were like, oh yeah, that's, you know, we call her Lucy and we call him Ralph. They are members of the community here, so that's pretty cool. You saw two of our, you know, it's kind of like in Cheers when every time they'd walk in and be like, Norm, you know, it's like the regulars, like we were greeted by the regulars of that place. That we saw the ones that the people that are there every day are like, yes, we know those exact beings that you're speaking of. They are our regulars around here. How cool that you saw them. So that was just, I think when we lower our guard and we come with this sort of sense of reverence that Matthew mentioned, when we've had meaningful coincidences, meaningful experiences in nature, there's a deep sense of reverence and openness that it's possible to bring with us. And I feel like that gets witnessed and or sensed by the land itself and by the beings on the land, and can allow, you know, beautiful interactions to unfold. And I see that Lula has her hand raised. So Lula, why don't you come off mute and ask a question or give us your comment?
Hi, Juliet. I would like to quickly mention my experience. Can I?
Yes.
So it's another question. And it's also about dragonflies. So when Matthew mentioned that, I remembered my experience from a few years ago. And when he was talking, I started to cry, but now I stopped. But yeah, like basically as you talk about the reverence, like sending reverence to the nature, I don't know, maybe my English is not so good. Does it mean like sending love and gratitude?
Yes,
Right?
yes. And
Yeah.
to acknowledge the sacred, something sacred, to revere it as to think of it as holy or sacred.
Yeah, so that's what happened to me. I was in one island, Corsica, in Europe, and we drew like far away to the middle of the island to one lake. There was no one. It was really no humans. And I'm like, okay, I can go naked to the lake. So I went naked. Normally I don't do that. And I was in a lake and I spread my hands and I just felt like so much gratitude, you know, towards the nature and around. And I started to say like how beautiful it is. And then how I love it to be here. And like really, I felt it like in the heart. And then red dragonfly, which I never seen before, came to me. And I'm like, oh my God. And I was doing the same, sending like love and gratitude. And I asked her, like, can you bring your friends and family? I would love to meet them. And imagine like, it was like hundreds of them, hundreds of red dragonflies came there. And I was just like, oh my God, like she understood. And I started to cry, and I cried for half an hour, but like with a smile on my face.
Mm.
And my boyfriend, like he was doing something in the car. He didn't see that. I came to him, I was crying. He's like, what happened? I'm like, dragonflies came to me. He's like, and what? Like he didn't get that. But even now, after years, when I remember, I cry, I feel that love, you know.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you, Lula. And where are you
Yeah,
today in the world?
I'm in Switzerland,
In-
and you mentioned the caves and hermitage. I moved 2 months ago to another part of the city, like to small village, and there is like 10 minutes away is hermitage, a place in the forest with a small castle and lots of caves, and I go there every day. It's just so beautiful. It feels so good to be there. And also, I wanted to mention I'm forest therapy guide.
Mm.
After all these experiences I had in the nature, I just want to guide people to the forest, to connect to where we are coming from. Yeah.
Yes, thank
you.
you. Well, it's lovely to meet you, Lula.
Thanks very much.
And my partner leading that retreat that I just mentioned, the Mindfulness and Nature Retreat, she's a trained forest therapy guide as well. I love that this field is emerging with more and more forest therapy guides around the world to help people have safe, connected experiences, because we lost some contact. As Matthew said, there's this artificial humans and the natural world as if they're different things. And they're, of course, they're actually not. It's just the world. We are actually part of the world. And I think these connections can help us to rediscover that. So I think let's see, who else is off of mute? I'm going to put. So Lula, thank you. And you can lower your hand now. I appreciate your story so much. Thank you for sharing. That's beautiful about the dragonflies. And Annie has her hand raised. So Annie, do you want to come and add something? Trying to find the mute button. You're still on mute. Oh,
Okay, very
there you are.
quickly, I read about an animal. Not going to use a lowercase anymore. Like raccoon, it'll be capital R, because they're all nations. They're all tribes. So I'll do capitals from now on. Am I writing?
Yeah, just on that.
On the reverence.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
I
And
learned. Thank you. Thank you, Lula.
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, I see many people obviously, capitalize nature and earth, and I think there's something subtle but important in doing that. The other thing just came up last week, a conversation with a gentleman who's of Shona backgrounds. That's sort of the predominant peoples from Zimbabwe. And he was talking about how commonplace totems were. And when you talk about nations, it just reminded me of that conversation that it was if, that each person, I guess, is responsible for a certain nation. And there's that, and by having these totems responsible for certain nations, it's your responsibility not to eat that particular animal and to protect it. And in some ways, what I like about that ecologically is that in a sense there's a custodian for each species, and it should, in a functioning culture and world, mean that there's a balance there, that someone is speaking the voice of nature for each particular species, and is looking out saying, hang on, we're hunting that one too much. There's not enough of that one. We need to take action. So yeah, I think there's a really important ecological dimension there to totemism as well, which we maybe often don't consider. And I like the idea of it being a nation, that they are nations within that ecosystem.
Yeah, and I love from Lula's comment also that she began to really cultivate this feeling of her heart, that we have a huge energy field and an energy center of the heart, and we can cultivate that. And we've had recent history of the last few hundred years overemphasizing the field of the mind. And that's maybe not the field that's most needed here. But if we can land back in our hearts and really increase our awareness and our attention, expand that heart field, the connections can flow very easily. And I think there's that sense of gratitude that Lula also mentioned, that we feel such deep love and respect for the other beings that we share this reality, this existence with, and we present them with our full gratitude just for existence. You know, it's a different way than we often typically conduct our day-to-day lives. Although I think we can really hold on to this feeling and take it as we go into the world. We can have gratitude, openness, awareness, and a deep sense of moving from our hearts. It is possible to have more and more of these experiences. I think Matthew was mentioning the cumulative impact of these experiences. They become more observable by others. So you get that objective, someone else can say, yes, that really did happen. You know, the otters appeared after your class was playing the game of being otters and things like that. And it just, we build an awareness, the way of being that becomes the new mode that's available to us all the time. And I see Sue's hand up as well. So Sue, why don't you come off mute and join us? Welcome. Hi. Nice to see you.
Hello, thanks, Juliet. I have a less spectacular version of the story of the hundreds of fireflies, but I just thought I'd mention it. When I first moved to Pasadena, I was renting a house with another girl, a fellow motorcyclist at the time. And it had a pool, and it was quite a lovely little place. It was sheltered by trees and everything. And eventually, I started dating the fellow that I'm actually with right now. So this was over 25 years ago. And you know, we had a pool, we had some floating, you know, what do they call it, rafts, that we would put out there and just lie there. And there were a lot of fireflies that used to come. I'm sorry, dragonflies. That's my, sorry about that. So now you know what story I was talking about earlier. And, you know, they would always come around, but you could, you know, they never lit on anything or alighted on anything. So as we would hang out, we were there for a full weekend. The first time we started to really see each other. And when they would come around, I started to just put my finger out, thinking, you know, maybe they'd light on the finger. And he was kind of thinking, you know, you're really being very optimistic. And then by the third day, one actually got on my finger, and they started to hang around us quite a bit. And this just so impressed him, where I was just thinking there was a chance, you know, there was a chance. And I really, when I think back, especially listening to these stories about dragonflies, I've never really thought of it as a sign, but in looking back, I think he really started to pay attention to me, thinking, who is this person? You know, how could you have done that? Because that was the kind of thing he had started to mention. But of course, you know, you just pass off things at that time as saying, well, it was just, you know, it was just something I got lucky. But considering now we've been together now in our house 25 years and together for like 28 years, it really was probably, if not a sign to me because I didn't take it so seriously, I think it was something that really got him to focus on, you know, maybe this is a person that I'd like to know more about, and it's led to all of this.
Thanks. Thanks, Sue. Something really important that I'd like to comment on. I think it's very interesting because I really like to see our connection with nature as if it were a relationship. And I think what I see there is an interesting mirroring, because anyone who's spent a bit of time in nature would know that when we bring all our human stuff and we just enter into nature, the birds and animals pick it up and they're off, and we send these ripples out through the landscape. And it takes a few days for us to get into some sort of baseline and resonance where we're not seen as a threat, or when we're on a bit more of a more tune. And I think, the more we're going in terms of, you spoke about the heart stuff, Juliet, even some neurophysiology, working at alpha brain state and what have you, I think we will get to a time where we might start to realize, hang on, beta, which is our norm, isn't really a norm in nature. And if we get into the other states, we might have more coherence with nature. But I want to put that aside. But I think it's interesting because for me, that's also a metaphor there, Sue, because as we come to know nature and nature comes to know us, it's just like a relationship that, your partner, by you being with nature and nature starting to see you, it's also like with you being your partner and you start to know your partner more. And I think, as we go through those layers and we sit with nature and we're sitting in the same space, being with the same animals, they come to seek us out. They're curious and they start to see us as not being a threat and part of that ecosystem. And I find that quite a bit of resonance also with your partners, with your relationship with your partner as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And, I will say I spend a lot of time also thinking about and teaching about compassion. And compassion is a term that gets used in a lot of ways. And one good definition of it is the wish to behave or act to prevent harm or suffering to others and to increase their well-being. And so when we have self-compassion, we have a wish to act or behave. So it's not just the longing or kind of an altruistic goodwill that we beam out, but actually taking it into action. So compassion is a state of readiness for acting or being in certain ways. And when it's for ourselves, we want to increase our well-being and decrease our pain or suffering. And it's a good thing to attend to, because when we're in a lot of pain, what we take out into the world tends to perpetuate or continue that cycle and create more of it. We see people doing great harm to others. I often think that's a person that's in a lot of pain. Otherwise, why would they behave in that way? And so when we attend to our inner state of compassion, it can help us to enter, as Matthew's saying, these new states that are received in nature differently. They're more harmonious with nature. Nature is not locked in its own head the way humans tend to get. And so, when we can get out of that and be more in a state of what can I do to help? What can I do to serve? How could I increase well-being to the environment that I'm in? Whether that's caring for a garden or taking care of the garden snakes, like Annie's story. Now she carves them. She created a kind of totem relationship that now she's the guardian of those creatures and creates art to honor them. Whatever it is that we're doing to increase well-being, to increase respect, and the ability for other beings to thrive. That is compassionate action. And I think when we have these meaningful experiences, our field of deep lived connectedness increases. And we really want that. And that's why things like forest therapy and mindfulness in nature, nature connection, all these different words that we're using to describe this, that a lot of us here on this call today are maybe engaged in or beginning to think about, so important because the world is really suffering. It's really struggling. We have massive climate change and loss of species. And I think it's time for us to be more aware of our capacity to act in ways that contribute to the well-being of other species, other beings, and while attending to our own as well. And we need to have a balance. If we're not attending to our own well-being and only acting and serving others, we can get burned out or resentful. There's just an imbalance. So it really is about doing some inner work, I think, to keep us in a place of well-being and peacefulness, and then looking out into the world to see what else can we do to increase the well-being and decrease pain or harm or suffering that's happening to others around us. And not just the human world, but very much also the more than human world of all other beings. I also see that Zako has his hand raised. Why don't you come off mute and I'll bring you up Hello,
Zarko.
Zako.
Hello.
Welcome.
Yeah, I am always a little worried about, that in spite of kind of paying attention supposedly to nature and so on, we are paying attention mostly to ourselves. We become center of attention. We are the one who go there in the forest for our own benefits. It's always continued to be utilitarian. If we get signs from the nature, we kind of consider what is the sign for me, what's important, who is sending the message, and so on. And the last things what Matthew says, I was already writing here. For me, it seems to me what is most interesting is the curiosity of animals toward us. That is really fascinating. And, I see here, I live in the country on 5 acres, and the deer and skunk and woodchuck and turkey and when I was in Brazil, parrots, they were so interested, curious, not just about each other. You can see them, birds looking at each other of different species. And then they come on my door and, there is a raccoon. He's kind of comes to the glass door and scrapes and so on. I said, hey, got away. And he scraps. We tried to, I don't know if he tried to get in or not, but this seems to me so interesting how, curious they are. So I think that's what I wanted basically to say. Let's kind of find out what the hell I think it's in their mind. I can never become, a raccoon or parakeet and so on. But this is just amazing thing to me. Okay, that's what I wanted to say.
Thanks, Zarko. And yeah, I really appreciate that. And I mean, you re-emphasized an important point that it's our default, to be very much, what is it about us and what is it for me? And, I'm as guilty of that as anybody at times. And there's some part of that that's important in terms of understanding our own, place in this world and that. But I think our own place in the world, if you look at many other cultures, is defined by our relations with those around us. And it is a beautiful thing to be able to try to enter into the mind of other life and wonder, what is their experience like, and how can I make their experience more enjoyable or easier on this life, particularly if, as Juliet said, they are under stress from, habitat destruction and all the rest. So yeah, it need not be about us. And again, I think about the yin yang symbol is that there may be something there for us, but I think it's important to be also step out of our own sense of self for a moment and just really appreciate them as beings totally independent of any layering of meaning that we need to put on top of them. And, when I started my research, I was very much curious, how can we create meaningful nature experiences? How do we find these peak experiences? How do we do it? And you can't manufacture these experiences, but you can cultivate the ground, the soil. And the soil for me is that nature connection, which, that ground of being. And in that, there will be some seeds of synchronicity. There will be some meaningful experience, but at least our baseline, the soil in which all our experiences will grow, will be more grounded in connection with, with nature, with other people, with ourselves. So, yeah. Just while I've got the mic, I wanted to just acknowledge Kate's comment about dreams, and I didn't speak to that, and you could, and it's a whole lot more there. But I just want to acknowledge that yes, I'm very much speaking to animals appearing here in their physical form, but as you'd probably be aware, in many other cultures, the differentiation there is almost can be very little, and dreams, animals appearing in dreams have their own meaning, their own message for people. And I think, it should be taken seriously. I know some people, dream analysis, for me, I see there's different qualities of dreams. Sometimes I feel my mind's just purging and I don't take much notice of them, but there are others that have a certain quality, particularly when there's animals that I'm like, that's speaking to something. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. And obviously certain animals carry a certain kind of signature or a certain meaning, and, owls in particular, eagles, snakes, definitely. I mean, they're some of the big three that over the years have had a lot of meaning put on them. Cool. Thanks. I don't know if you want to say anything else, Juliet, there.
Yeah, I'm just posting the Coincidence Project website in the chat, coincidenceproject.net. And I hope some of you will contribute to the story forum. So it's on the homepage or on the menu bar. It says share a story. And you can add your own experiences and stories, because we are trying to share these with one another in the project and begin to do more research with the new stories coming in. So I would really welcome all of you that are here on the call tonight to go to the website and add a story. If you have a photograph, there's a place you can even upload an image. So like, Matthew got the wonderful photograph of the dragonflies. You can add a photo. And if not, we select one that seems to reflect the imagery in your story to post with it. So you can kind of look through the other stories people have shared. And that might be a nice way to have the conversation from tonight kind of deepen and continue. We'll keep talking about these things. We did about a year of weekly sessions also on Clubhouse, which is an app where people can go into chat rooms around various subjects. And we had several different sessions entirely about nature connection and nature coincidences. And there, people have we all have wonderful experiences to share. And I think highlighting these and bringing it more to conscious awareness is important right now, so that we, as Zako says, we don't always have to put ourselves first. We can really flip the attention on the world around us rather than seeing ourselves as the central figure. What is the world calling for right now? What is needed here? And bringing that awareness out past just this meeting, maybe into our daily lives, I think would be a gift to the other beings that we are sharing this planet with. And Sue, I saw you came off mute. Did you want to add to something?
Yeah. Thank you, Julie, for noticing. I just wanted to mention one thing that happened during the pandemic is, I was in the house all the time working at home. And I mean, my boyfriend was with me and everything, but also working at home. I started having a relationship with little daddy long legs spiders that, you'd find in the bathroom, which my mother had always said, don't kill them. They're taking care of other more, noxious insects. But I started to, really feel like they were a part of, the relationship that I could have. And I rescued several from like water dishes for my dogs and actually revived them, or mistakenly didn't realize one was in the shower and everything. And I wonder if there's a lot of people that have the pandemic helped them get more in touch with nature, because you were shut in or kind of homebound. That was one of the beautiful things about the pandemic, if there was any good thing to really have.
Yes, so there's been quite a lot of research showing just actually what the pandemic, or the lockdowns, I would say, did for appreciation of nature. I mean, for all their torment and I mean, the kickbacks of mental health are still being felt. Let's make no bones about that. But there was definitely a shift of appreciation for nature. We had taken it for granted. We were cut off from it. And I think the other thing that probably is lost, I mean, that has sort of been fairly well covered, but what you speak to was a bit lost. You had to make relationship and peace with your place, because that's where you were. And too often, we flit around from here to here to here to here, maybe chasing better places, better experiences, but all of a sudden the daddy long legs were important. All of a sudden there was things of life within our sphere that became of importance. And I don't know whether it was something in consciousness or whether it was just me, but I felt there were certain moments where my perception was very clear during those early lockdowns. There was a peacefulness in the air. Obviously, there was no traffic. Animals were coming out of places. They were coming into neighborhoods as well. We had a lot of records of that. But, just the appreciation of any bird that all of a sudden flew across, or anything, there was life. And because our interactions were cut, all of a sudden our interactions were coming with non-human life where they could. So yeah, obviously lockdowns were not experienced equally. Some people had a ball with bigger spaces. Some people, it was, horror and torment. But if we take the in between, the average person who maybe had a little bit of green space or a view or something, then exactly. I mean, these things were these little moments could really be profound. And what I've seen around here is that there's really been a demographic shift of those who are appreciating nature now and getting out, because there was this awareness of, what if it's taken away from me? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anybody else here that's on the call that hasn't had a chance to share, that might have a question or a comment that they'd like to share? We have a few more minutes before we'll break. We have about 13 more minutes together. So please feel free to raise your hand or come off mute. We have a quiet group.
Juliet, on that quietness, and just because I'm talking, if anybody else has a hand, I see Annie's got a hand. I'll just finish that sentence briefly. On the quietness, there is something about sharing these stories that I think it's obviously very personal. And there's that old adage from the Tao, the I Ching or the Tao Te Ching, the Tao that can be spoken is not the real Tao, and there's something about that with synchronicity. In a way, the synchronicity that can be spoken is not the real synchronicity. And I mean, I'm not discouraging people to share, but it'll never be the same as our lived experience. And it is also one of the things in my research I found trouble with, is just the retelling. There's something always there, and it is and often, I mean, was it Lula? Who was it? I think it was, with the dragonfly story, just coming back to tell the boyfriend, and it's like, what? And it's hard to have those receptive ears to really be able to appreciate what was felt by the experience. So yeah, sorry, go for it, Annie.
I'm 79 now, but 3 years ago, I've never seen a great horned owl here in Holland. But 3 years ago, I put a little metal sculpture out by our front door of a great horned owl, because this was in the end of March. And lo and behold, Sunday morning, I went out there and there's a baby great horned owl. It turned out to be 3 of them. And we ended up with a nature person putting the nest back and watching the parents take care of them. And we've had the owls around here for the last 3 years. And the crows getting mad at them all the time. It's just been the most wonderful experience for our condos here. So I'll post more on the chat, on the website.
Wonderful. Thank you, Annie.
With
Lovely.
pictures.
Yes, I love the pictures. All right, Zeko, see you again.
Yeah, well, when we have time to talk, so I said I can also tell stories, right? So this is about the my wife and me lived in Brazil, and the Indian would frequently bring us the small, they know that we liked animals and so on. So if they find out the abandoned animals, especially the birds, they would bring to us. So we would kind of warm them up, in the bed and so on, and feed them later and so on. And a lot of these are, and they were free to be in the house. A lot of them stayed there. A lot of were like owl and hunting during the night, came back, and the other would just kind of hang around and fly and come back and so on. One particular parakeet was very attached. It was kind of going around and climbing on our cat and scratching cat and so on. But whenever we would go somewhere, he went and fly on the shoulder of my wife. Now, when we went in Cuiabá, which is kind of the center of Mato Grosso, the largest city, and so on. No, he never got, there were a lot of small parakeets in the village. Indians love parakeets, so there are a lot of them. And he never got attached to any one of them. We didn't want to communicate this kiddo. We called him kiddo. And in large city, we walked through the streets and met another girl with a parakeet on her shoulder. Now, this is kind of, Cuiabá at that time, now it's $1 million city, but at that time it was 80,000 people already there. And you kind of met another girl with this and that shoulder. And we said, hi, you want to know each other? And we kind of put on the finger, and they kind of looked at each other and started to rub their hand and so on. And we talked and so on. Then we moved away and wanted to go our way. And a kiddo threw himself on the floor and wanted to be with that other, who was Deusa called. That one was kiddo and that was female Deusa. So he said, well, interesting. So, so we put it back and so nice, good to see you. He threw himself second time. So he said, it's obviously love. So we left the kiddo with Deusa, and that was the end of our relationship with kiddo. But it was so interesting that, you have to go in big city. He never, as I said, fell for any other parakeet, but this was the love at the first sight and didn't want to live here anymore. So that was, and just finding something like that in the big city, I think that might have been part of coincidences or something. So that's why I'm telling this story. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there's a human cultural function of the matchmaker. You see matchmakers in all different kinds of cultures, usually for other humans. But in this case, you were the matchmaker for Quito, your parakeet. You helped him find the love of his life. That's wonderful. Thank you for that story. I see Willa also. Hi, Willa. Let me come up and.
No. Hi, it's Jenny here. I just wanted to say to both of you, thank you for this beautiful experience. We're here at Wild Spirit, which is a sacred land in South Africa, close to where Matt lives. And there's 7 of us here enjoying this whole experience.
Oh.
So I just wanted to share a particularly beautiful, how many minutes do we have? But I'll share it very quickly. Years ago, there was a beautiful baby, a very young grass owl in the tree in our front garden, and I went out one night and we just connected eyeball to eyeball. We just saw each other, and I went back into the house and got both my 2 young children, one of which was a baby and another was a 4-year-old, and the 3 of us just deeply connected with this grass owl. And for the next 10 weeks, literally wherever I was on the land, that at night, that grass owl found me and came and connected, to the point where I moved out of the main house into a cottage so that I could be with it all through the night. We just had this extraordinary rapport for weeks and weeks on end. So that was just a very special experience of establishing a deep connection with this young grass owl. I felt as though I became its mother, which was very beautiful. And the other thing is we have a giant yellowwood tree just 5 minutes from our front door. And that tree has become, over the years, for me, for sure, a temple, literally my space to go to for guidance, for calming down, for, just getting perspective. And it's a tree that's now become that oracle for so many people. It's a guest lodge. So literally hundreds and actually now thousands of people have passed through this place over the 44 years that I've been there. And the tree is really a source of wisdom for all of us. And so I just thought it would be remiss of me not to mention Mama Yellowwood, who is very much our mother of the forest. I just love the whole thing of forest therapy, and it's lovely to have Matt close by. And I think we must definitely commit ourselves to doing more of this work, structuring workshops here at Wild Spirit, which we've always had, but I think it's time to accelerate that. And I so agree with you, Matt, that Zoom is all very well, but face-to-face contact and being with one another after this whole 3-year experience has become so important. So thank you. Thank you for this profound work that you're doing. And yeah, let's collaborate more. And I will encourage everyone here to write their stories and send them in to you to collaborate and expand on your own research. So thank you. This has been a very lovely time. I was so delighted that 7 of us gathered together this afternoon. So greetings and many blessings. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and thank you to all of you there at World Spirit, obviously for the wonderful work you do and for the support. Yeah, and yeah, there's a rich history there of meaningful experiences at Wild Spirit. So I'm grateful for your support today. Thank you, and lovely experiences shared as well.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think we've come to the end of our time here together, and I encourage all of you to go to thecoincidenceproject.net. If you haven't signed up for the email list, please do that, so that we have you to send out notices about our different events. And the Coincidence Cafe has different topics every month, and I know that we'll return again and again to this really important topic of nature, coincidences and synchronicity, and of compassion, and our connection to the earth and other beings. So I thank all of you for being here with us. It's been wonderful to have this session. I'm so grateful to Matthew for being our colleague and doing this session with me.
And thank you very much, Juliet, for hosting and finding a place in India. And thanks to everybody for participating. Really appreciate it, the conversations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Hopefully we'll see you all again. I hope it's not our last time together.
Indeed.